created my own little algorithms to do one thing or another, like disease states, a mortality algorithm. And
I think you will have a whole levels of robotics, the humanoid robots or non-humanoid robots, whatever the case is.
But the one that I really gravitated towards was Alteryx. Low code, no code, business intelligence stuff, data science, machine learning, things like that.
Audio, the text, and then there's big metaverse buzz. Everybody knows the metaverse.
Another week of AI.
All right. Live now for another episode of AYAYAI. We are on our 5th season now. So we have been working on something different. And today we're going to try the version 2 or episode 2 of Mastermind, which we have started as a recent contribution to the AI conversation, because there's a whole lot happening in the AI space. And one of the things that we've decided to do after 5th season is to move from classroom into that whiteboarding, right? Because when you're doing whiteboarding, you bring few selected individuals, have them sit around the boardroom and have them go through all of their knowledge, right? Which we call known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. It takes time to get from known to known unknown. It's a uncomfortable transition, but it's happening. It's what's keeping this AI momentum going. And I am so pumped up right now to say we can showcase this virtually, which happens physically in person. But now that we can show it virtually, we want to be able to give people that idea that you've been educated by lots of different, say, conferences, LMS, YouTube videos, but now you go from education to making decisions. And as you're making those decisions, you're on the whiteboard working through your organizational needs, because your educational knowledge came from universal use cases, right? But because of this whiteboarding session, you have to take your business use cases and move forward with your business use cases and execute on that. This boardroom conversation really has lots of challenges because artificial intelligence is going through a transition right now. That what is the hype and what is the reality? If you can understand the reality of it, it helps. But what's the reality of your business? What's the reality of your data? What's the reality of the software that you have been paying for or building for so many years? And now we're going back to that original conversation we had 25 years ago. What about the hardwares, right? Those hardwares were a major part of the conversation, and we're going back into the hardware conversation. So in this hour, we're going to have a few different discussions, and we will end with the hardware conversation. But first, we're going to talk about us, right? Because when there's a people, process comes after, and technology is delivered later. So we're going to talk about people, process, and technology, but let's talk about people first. We're going to talk about people's ability to do dissecting, right? Not frogs, right? We're talking about dissecting data. So the spectrum is wide, so we really have to understand us, the people, and how our intelligence works. So we will start with that part. We'll talk about identifying, labeling, and decision-making. Identifying, labeling, and decision-making is this 3 pieces of important information that will help you understand the current state of the software. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and play a video from a very smart conversation from World Economic Forum. This is our first video, so we'll play another video about the use cases in the middle of the session. And this conversation will help you to understand the impact, the spectrum, the wide variety of artificial intelligence conversations that are happening around the globe. And you will see how decision plays into it. And we will break that down once we get done with this video. So let's go ahead and play that clip. Okay, seems like we don't have sound. We don't have the sound, right, guys?
No.
You guys couldn't hear it? All right, we can play that again. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you, Sergio, for letting me know the sound is not working. Oh my goodness, yeah. All right. Okay, we'll just improvise here. How about that? Let's improvise. All right. So what he's talking about here, he's been asked the question that what's going on in the AI space and what's going to happen in the future of AI space.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's talking about is the fact that corporations are out there. They're corporations, and when you think about corporations in many layers, corporations that are merging, they're merging between people to people. But when there's a corporations that are merging and the AI is the one that's making those decisions, when they merge, AI is the one that's making that decision. So this creates a world where we don't even know who's buying what, right? But when the profit, is the motivation for the corporations, these AIs will be able to make those decisions, right? So the main point of this video for Yuval Noah Harari is that decision mechanism, right? Because we have a decision mechanism that we have today in the corporation in our workflow, but once you remove that decision-making capability or you add artificial intelligence to that decision-making capability, what does that look like, right? That goes into that intelligence conversation. The intelligence is if you have identifying, labeling, and decision-making, which is the third step, what is identifying and labeling looks like, right? Identifying and labeling is your current day software capability. That is software 2.0. In case you haven't moved into the latest version of software, the software 2.0 is good for identifying and labeling. And identifying and labeling is what softwares for the last 70 years have been really perfecting over time. Because if you think about it, the software is a logical system that's identifying and labeling continuously. It's the humans that are helping it to make that decision, so that way it can go back to making identifying, labeling even more. So humans in that loop, helping once you identified, once you label, helping to make that decision, right? Give me 1 second. I'm gonna add. Yeah. Hello. We're just kind of going through a video fiasco because the audio didn't work. So I'm explaining what the video was about. So this identifying software, if you don't want to go down the artificial intelligence rabbit hole, you want to start talking about software 3.0. And this software 3.0 is what's going to drive the motivation to get into a better business process that is run by software 3.0 if it's running on software 2.0 as of now. Right, because it's faster, it's even more intelligent, right? So this software 2.0 has a ceiling that it has capped itself, right? Because you have to continuously add decisions in order to make more decisions, right? And it slows the process down. But because you have software 3.0, your identifying, labeling, and making decisions goes into a whole nother gear. This is a tech talk. Software, original software 2.0, software 3.0. Many people are not going to be interested in that. So what we have to talk about is bring the non-techies into the conversation and say, what does that mean to you, right? Because if I can explain software 3.0 to Mr. Data, he loves it. Me and him will chop it up, right? We've been doing it forever. But when me and Grace, we have had many dinner and we have many conversations, but we switch up the conversation, right? We have to get the non-techies involved because non-techies are the ones that's going to be the end user. They will drive the feedback loop that comes with the artificial intelligence. So Identifying and labeling and decision making, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because it's what our brain does. This is the human intelligence every second of our existence. It's identifying things, finding patterns, labeling it correctly, labeling it in many different ways, and coming to the best conclusion so you can make the best decision. And if you can make best decisions from childhood to adulthood, you can mature, and maturity, you can prove to other people that, hey, he's done making some decisions. So as somebody who's an adult who makes bad decisions, we know they've been making bad decisions for a while. That's how they ended up in bad decisions. Identifying, labeling, and decision making is what human intelligence characteristics looks like. Artificial intelligence is doing just that. But here's a problem. Artificial intelligence is not necessarily artificial intelligence all across. It always doesn't make decisions. It always identifies and labels, maybe, but it doesn't necessarily make decisions all the time. Because if it did, if it made decisions all the time, it will have a predictive part of it, which is that it can predict the next decision based on last million decisions it has made. That's what human brain does. Human brain takes that decisions of forever making decisions and say the next decision I'm going to make is going to be the decisions that's going to serve me good or make me learn something new, because that's something new that I have done. All right. So the conversation on the video also went into the money route. What happens to money? What happens to fiat? What happens to currency that's printed on paper? How digital will it be? Software 3.0, the reason I use software 3.0 more often than artificial intelligence is to identify the fact that intelligence requires communications and transactions. What if artificial intelligence had its own currency and it was interacting between the AIs, and that causes the problems that we don't know how that solved down the road? But it's happening right now. We know about CloudBot, which turned into Open Cloud these days. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's trying to jump in it without the cybersecurity in mind, right? So today's panel here, I see Grace is going, yeah, come on, guys. But it's because everybody's picking it up, okay? So we want to simulate a non-techie and techie conversation between group of people like myself and Mr. Data. Sahar, she is a techie, but she's going to play the role of project manager. She's going to give her feedback and opinions around project management side of things. Because when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we have to take all the information and come to a conclusion about our own business, our own process. So we talked about people, now let's talk about the process. If your people have enough background to jump into the conversation and contribute, all of a sudden you're developing a process that is made for your business, not for your Joneses, right? That's what we call it, keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's not about the Joneses. This is about us. This is about our business process, our security, and best of all, our data, the data ownership, which we will talk about in the next segment. If the video cooperates, yeah, we'll see. But I want to make a quick introduction here as well. Let's go ahead and share the screen. We don't need sound on this one, so we'll just go ahead and talk about Vivek. So we have Vivek. If you guys are interested, you can add him on LinkedIn. He is, how would I say it? Probably the smartest person that Army has. It's like, Air Force needs C-130 and A-10. Vivek is needed in the Army in a similar manner. Like, he's just a sharp guy, and I love chatting with him. He has tons of information that I learn everything new from him every time. And then we have Grace, who is also on LinkedIn. And Grace and I do this dinner event where this is what we do. We chat about artificial intelligence, and we figure out what are the best practice the industry will need. And she's also a subject matter expert in a lot of the human capital topics. And then, of course, we have Sahar, who I've known for a while, but this is my first time actually getting to see her in person or in the virtual world. So looking forward to the conversation here, because as you can tell, we brought 3 different personality, because this is what you need. You need the multiple personas to come together in a conversation and contribute, right? If you are contributing your opinions and your values and your understanding of topics from your perspective, all of a sudden we don't all start in the same point, but we start having the same conclusion actually, right? And that's the power of these mastermind sessions that we've been doing. And we have seen lots of impact from this mastermind, which helps to derive to the decision point. All right, so let's open up the mic. I know everybody's off mute here. Sahar, let's start with you, project manager, right? If you've been given a project and the artificial intelligence topic is included in there, what do you drive the conversation with? Like, what are some of the things that you've experienced in your engagements?
With AI, you can automate a lot of stuff. You can do anything you want from decision-making point of view, from the project manager point of view, and non-technical. You still need humans to validate the output and define the roles and manage the risk. And like you said, recently everybody jumped into OpenClaw, and that new thing just came up, and without thinking about security and without thinking about the risk it brings. So yeah, identifying and labeling may be automated, but someone still needs to confirm the accuracy. And as a project manager, the gap, what happened is that you got technical and you got non-technical. So somebody got to explain the end users, how to review the cases, the test reviews, and escalate, all the problems. So with AI, yes, the help is there, but what if the process break down? You still need to know the difference.
Yeah, I think that comes down to the data ownership part of it, and that's the way I would add more to what you just said, because you walk into a room and there's everybody enthusiastic about AI. This corner of the room, you have some gentleman that is interested in what he saw on YouTube last night about humanoid robots. Now, he thinks robots is what we need as an organization. And the other side of the room, you have a PhD guy who just wants to fix his Excel sheet. He wants to have that good set of structured data. And they can both disagree, but they can also agree that without that Excel sheet, you cannot have a humanoid robot. And the reason they don't know that is because they don't have the baseline of what is data and what is hardware to them, right? Because they have seen the power of software, but they haven't really talked about the hardware and the data component of it, right? So when they see eye to eye, they actually have a better communication. And that's what makes the project manager's life even easier, because everybody engaged, every stakeholder, everybody that's delivering the project, everybody's working through that ops, the IT ops, ML ops, AI ops, LLM ops, whatever it is, they all see eye to eye. They have the same sort of conversation, because they're not living off of the hype, but they're rather living off the data of the business owns. So let's move into Mr. Data over here, right? Mr. Data, tell me some, about your experience and your thoughts on how things are progressing.
No, absolutely. To your point, especially from a cybersecurity point of view, when you talk about data, you're already talking about data ownership. Again, who defines where the data lives, and who can access what, access controls, all that good stuff, right? It boils down to the data owners and what we can and cannot share. So that plays a huge role in terms of, like, as Sahar was mentioning, in terms of where we can draw the line, and in terms of delineation, and and even sovereignty, in terms of, like, with geodiverse networks. If you're running a model somewhere in this part of the world, can the same model be run in a different part of the world? You're going to cross some fine boundaries there. So I think it's kind of an interesting gamut of things to consider when it comes to, like, from a cybersecurity point of view.
Yeah. I think you're coming from a specific part of the world of AI where you guys have tons of money, but tons of money doesn't solve any of your problem.
Yes.
I know that because I've been there. one of the things that I've seen is helping people visualize the end product, right? So, hey, look, we're going to do this for the next 5 months, but this is what we end up with in 5 years, right? So the other segment, we will talk about use cases. But what you said is very important, because a lot of the organizations will say, because of AI, we're going to change up our operations, right? We're going to go for, say, from DevOps to MLOps, because that's a smart decision to make, right? That's great. I love that. However, that doesn't necessarily show everybody what is the end product that we're looking for. So GIS conversation, right? Your geospatial data, your understanding of your physical structure of your business. Are you improving that? Are you going to do something about that? So when we talk about a lot of these software component, we don't necessarily end up discussing digital twin. And that to me is like, hey, how do we miss that conversation again? Let's kind of rewind that and go back to digital twin, because if we're doing AI, we have to do digital twin. And this is not me, Asif, saying it because that's my favorite topic. Is because NVIDIA, Apple, Facebook, Siemens, SAP, Oracle, just keep naming names, and they're all in digital twin space already. What they're looking for is customers to join them and buy into that digital twin technology. So, yep, those are the kind of topics that we have to keep continuously push, because cybersecurity-wise, digital twin can actually predict some of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities because your AI is that intelligent. So, best way I've actually seen somebody describe artificial intelligence is that you have BIs that you have been developing for so long. Now you have artificial intelligence. Well, what comes after artificial intelligence? It's the CI component, cognitive intelligence. If you can make cognitive intelligence part of your business suite, now you have AIs that everybody's talking about today. But if you keep talking about AI, you're going to end up with a bunch of answers and no cognitive intelligence. So you really have to push forward with a 5-year strategy to say, we're going to strategize, but we're going to have a goal in mind for the next 5 years. And how do we operationalize today? How do we operationalize 1 year from now? We have to have those discussions in the whiteboard, right? Before we get to the keyboard. So here comes Grace, graciously, So Grace, I know you had to run in and jump in, so thank you so much for making the time. This is, I know, one of my favorite conversations is to have with you, because you always have a unique perspective about people, right? Because I'm a process guy. I love process. But when I talk about people and you bring in the human capital, then the conversation is very interesting. So tell us your thoughts. How does that go for you? Audio? Is the audio on? No, can't hear it. Nope. Mic check. No. What do I have to do here? No, nothing coming through. Okay, she's going to jump in later. All right. So you see, we're talking through people, and then we're getting into the process a little bit, because we're bringing in the people to help them understand the future of the process that they already know. How do we transition that into the future process? And of course, we want to deliver a technology through it, but is the technology most important or the process the most important, right? Process has a succession. Process has people that has to take that process and improve that process or destroy that process. I say destroy lightly because that's not the intention, but intention is to break that process so you can build a new one, right? So if you have to have a succession of the process, how do you build an ownership? And Sahar, help me understand this. Right now in IT ops, in DevOps, the process is to say, hand this over and you got it, because it's coding and programming based. There's millions of codes in there. 85 different people wrote it, 8,500 lines each. Help me understand, how is that going? And I'll tell you more about how the AI ops goes, because there's a lot of component to it. But tell us about your current experience. What are we facing right now?
Right. So without AI is all great, but with the multiple contribution at the same time, and with AI integration, definitely, from the project manager or the DevOps point of view, I mean, who owns each component, and how do we validate all the outputs, and what happens if, like, if there's a problem happens, if there's a problem arise, like how do we escalate the process, right? So the complexity, the AI output, the server infrastructure, the all that, before we can optimize AI, flow, we need to understand the environment that it's running in. So that means inventory, the dependency, the mapping, the risk assessment, all that is from a project management. It's all responsibility. But AI can automate, but without the clear process and accountability, that's where majority problems happen. AI can scale, but errors and things like that, those has to be governance around them, right? There's a lot of code, but without ownership and verification, those are potential risks.
Yeah. And to add to that, like we talked about earlier, that identifying, labeling, and decision making, because right now in software 2.0 world, decisions are being made by majority humans because system can identify and label. So what we know as an expert system can get up to the labeling process very, very well, and that's what makes the human's input very much the core component of it. So if you use artificial intelligence to add, let me let Grace in here. All right, Grace, sound check. No sound check. No sound check. Yeah, the mic is totally not coming through. Yeah, try it one more time. See how that works. What's happening with the removal of humans in the decisions and having intelligence system going there? We cannot just rely on just text, right? Because that's what majority of the Gen AI hype is, based on text, which generates more text. So that's one of the big complaints about all the executives, is that, hey, this system is only producing more text off of the text that I already have. So, how does that work for my business process? Because I don't need to know sun and the moon. I just need the systems to know the ground truth from my business, right? I just need to know how my trucks operates. I needed to know how my tires are inflating, right? Those sort of conversations are far different than, philosophical discussion about, sun and the moon, right? With the decisions being made by artificial intelligence, now we have sort of different roles to play, right? Because you're continuously monitoring a system and you're contributing to the feedback loop of that system. So these individual works that we have done through text, it can go to artificial intelligence, but not everything, right? I think at this point, if I was to bring up a single topic that is on everybody's mind, which is that, how is the software companies that has the best of the best revenue so far, but they are losing on their stock shares? Like, why are they being devalued, right? So the simplest way to answer that is because they're text heavy. They make so much money today by generating more text or producing documents, but they cannot give the confidence to the Wall Street that the future of these companies are solid, right? Because Wall Street doesn't care about how much revenue you made today. It cares about how much revenue you made plus your future perspectives, right? Future perspective for the software companies are, I wouldn't go too far, but I would say software 3.0 is not a joke, right? Software 3.0 has a component that we really, really have to pay attention, which is that human in the loop. This is not an old concept. This concept just becomes that much more important because it's a software 3.0. Software 3.0 means, yes, you can take that human task and give it to an intelligent system, which is expert system that is also a learner system. And we can talk about that offline, or you can look that up on Claude, right? Or ChatGPT. Expert system versus learner system. Learner systems is where the difficulty comes in because of hardware constraint, right? But in the software 3.0 world, if you're not talking about HITL, the human in the loop, you are not doing software 3.0. You are just sticking to software 2.0 with a bunch of patches on it. Get this guy, get this guy, get this guy, and just make it somewhat intelligent. And we have seen those intelligent systems, which is not AI at all. It's just artificial individuals. That's what they call it. And we've seen it in many fraud cases where that was just total fraud AI. It had nothing to do with AI at all, right? So the software 3.0 conversation that we've been having for a while now, it's coming to the point that you really have to sit back and say, I have so much options with software 3.0. I can develop my software 3.0 using CloudBot or OpenCloud, right? Or I can just outsource it to an intelligence system to write more codes for me and keep continuously writing codes for me, right? Now we're talking about identifying and labeling to making decisions that are, you all right, Mr. Data? What happened?
Yeah, no, it's all good. So I wish I could show my background, but I have a ton load of balloons and a welcome home decoration. So one of the balloons just popped on me. I was like, what the heck? I thought it was electrical burst.
This conversation is popping, bro. That's how the balloons
an electrical fire.
Yeah.
It's one of the balloons. It must have hit a rough spot on the wall, on the drywall, and it decided to call it a day. So it's all good. It's all good.
So let's try Grace one more time. Grace.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Oh, yay. You made it.
We did it.
Something has worked.
I had to change browsers, so we're on Firefox. Firefox doesn't let me down.
Firefox to rescue. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you've probably been listening and hearing a whole lot of things that we've been talking about, but we just talked about human in the loop, right? We're talking about removing the human between identifying, labeling, and decision making, adding intelligence to the decision piece, and then removing the humans to a different role, right? Human in the loop. Grace, just to give you an example, a lot of the questions that me and you had, I think one of the specific topic that we talked about is that what happens to entry-level roles, right? As of today, the things are changing for entry-level roles. Because first, what we talked about is that removing those entry-level roles. But now, I think as a few days ago, we're talking about adding more entry-level roles. It's just that different types of entry-level roles, right? So human in the loop is changing for good, in a good direction, at least for now, at least for today. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. But one of the things that we talked about previously is that you remove the entry-level roles and you roll everybody into the second tier where you take your subject matter expertise of entry-level role and do more of them on the second tier, right? So tasks that you can outsource to AI, it becomes, entry-level AI, and then on top of that, everybody else sits, right? Just to give you an example, Grace, a project manager used to be a project managing about 8 or 10 individuals. Now we're talking about, according to Andrew Ng and all sorts of people in deep learning AI and Stanford, they're talking about one project manager who's both technical and functional with possibly 2 engineers, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
But that does not mean there's only 3 people instead of 12. That means that you're doing that many projects actually that you have, multiply that and you have 36 individuals now, because you want to cover that much more ground. You want to develop that much more software. Say, for example, you have never thought about geospatial data, digital twin. You have never picked that up because it wasn't something part of your budget, right? But now you have so many people and they have to do so much and your revenue is just going up and up, right? What do? You move on to the things that previously was a budget constraint. Now you start developing digital twin. And digital twin is no joke, right? You have AI, now you want to do digital twin, all of a sudden you need 36 different teams, if I may say so, right? So let me pause here. Let me hear from you, Grace. That's the kind of back and forth we've been having about, what happens to the humans that are working in the workforce.
Yeah. So, I love these kind of conversations and being around these kind of conversation and always trying to bring the human into the room when it comes down, to tech and AI, and, in general, technology itself, especially with AI, since, artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, within the world of talent acquisition, talent augmentation, and HR overall. What what was really hot topics, starting like from 23 and on, and even still some now, is the job displacement conversations, right? The things that you just mentioned. In that regard, to me, kind of the way I always saw this is, and you kind of touched on that, Asif, is the fact that technology, whether it's AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning, et cetera, it replaces tasks, not the entire role of it overall, right? There is still, I think, need. The more of that task is eliminated, the more of that role itself is eliminated per se, right? But it doesn't mean that the human is totally exited out of that, right? Because especially when it comes down to decision making, as Sahar mentioned earlier, it's an important component of that, right? And you touched on CI and AI, and I want to throw in EQ in that as well. The emotional intelligence behind everything, which is an important factor. But also, Asif, we have had discussions in rooms before where we had leaders at the table, and we talking about the implementation of new technology, specifically in the areas of AI. And one thing that I recently been coming across a lot is the educational aspect of things, towards when it comes down bringing your employees and along with you, not dragging, bringing them along with you in a way that I found often, especially in certain organizations, where employees don't understand which part is external, which part is internal, for example, right? When we're using ChatGPT, when we're using, other implemented in-house AIs, what can you use, what can you not use? Now, a lot of organizations will have either ChatGPT or Gemini or things like that with in-house also, right? Catering specifically to their needs. But I think there is still like a lot of education needed, even with the tools that they are constantly adding on and adding on and adding on. And, for folks like you guys, it's like shiny toys every time something new comes up, it's exciting, it's new, it's, it's a shiny toy. So, so I think for the human in that are not necessarily involved in this, that are not necessarily techie, I believe there is still a lot of hand-holding needed, especially the older generation. You're talking about entry level. A lot of times when we talk entry level is the younger generation. Now, I think there is a lot of anxiety for those who are established professionals now having to deal with a lot of the changes within the industries. And each industry has its own, right? I am biased in this, but I think HR does not have, I think has one of the most infusion of AI and artificial intelligence, whether it's from LD, learning development, whether it's from talent acquisition aspects, whether it's in individual different aspects of HR, right? Whether, you can data wise, you guys talk a lot about data. It's huge within the HR aspect of things as well. So the list is long, I feel like, in HR, depending which corner of HR you're looking at. And I don't want to keep on talking about this. I'm going to give the mic back to you guys. But I think there's so much you can talk about, but also kind of in the back of our minds, we really have to always have like the human aspects, the emotional intelligence, what are we giving our employees or the people within our organization, because you're not going to erase people from organizations.
Yeah, no, I think you are doing what we needed for our next video, which we will try, and if the audio works, yay. But I'm gonna have to switch tactics here, right? So give me 1 second. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, but I think I have to do the full window. Or no. Okay. If I play it, give me a thumbs up if it's working.
What I've seen is non-technical employees are able to do incredible things. Here's one example. The National Park Service called me and asked me if I would conduct a training program for a bunch of backcountry rangers. So they gathered a group of about 60 backcountry rangers and facilities managers into a training session. And I spent a couple of hours over Zoom teaching folks the basics of collaborating with AI. One of the people in that session was a gentleman named Adam Reimer, who works at Glen Canyon National Park. And one of the things I say is you should focus on parts of your work that you dread, parts of your work that you don't enjoy, that you think, oh, I have to do this again. And Adam said, if I have to replace the carpet tiles in the lodge, I have to fill out all of this paperwork. And so to replace a carpet tile will sometimes take 2 or 3 days of paperwork. Then he thought, could AI help me write that paperwork? And in 45 minutes, he built a tool with natural language that saves him 2 days of work every day he makes a statement of work. And then listen to this. Someone got access to that tool and shared it across the other parks. There's about 430 parks in the service. The National Park Service is estimating that the tool that Adam built in 45 minutes is going to save the service 7,000 days of human labor this year. That's the kind of impact that normal professionals can have even without any technical ability, if only they're given very basic foundational training.
So this is exactly what we were talking about with Grace, right? I see that the video audio didn't come through. So what I will do is I'll probably put that on the chat somewhere after we're done here. So both of the video links are available from the starting point that I intend to present. So what's happening here is a lot of the use cases, and this is the transitions that we wanted to have, is because now we wanted to talk about data. Now we want to talk about software. Now we want to talk about hardware, because that's the end part of the conversation. But we want to spend some time here because it gets a little bit more technical, but this is what I need, or I'm seeing the most impact out of the non-techies. Non-techies that can communicate, articulate their own data because they're the data owners. They don't know it yet, but once they do, all of a sudden they start thinking differently. Because the impact that I've seen most that is fascinating with individuals is that they say, you know, I'm just a guy in a keyboard. I write emails and that's about it. I click on a few things and that's about it. So I'm not necessarily a techie. It's really hard to make them believe that even if you are a non-techie, you are going to be a coder. It's like, wait a second, what? Like, yes, you're not coding, but you're going to become a coder, right? You're going to become a coder because that's where the coding is today. You're seeing a lot of the layoffs in the software industry because the codes are being written by artificial intelligence, right? The large language model. So what the majority of the population learns about through, say, Zoom calls and YouTube videos is the surface layer information that doesn't necessarily drive into their workflow, doesn't necessarily talk about their operational, day-to-day operations, things that they're involved in, right? Which is that they will hear about text to text. They will hear about text to image. You know, you go to Facebook, it's all text to image, right? Everybody just kind of throwing images all around, videos all around, but they don't necessarily talk about text to code. And that's what's revolutionizing the whole concept of where you are with data and why software will be minimal of your problem. And I want to say that again. Data, you take the ownership of it, and software will be least of your problem, because we're going to talk about hardware. All right. So this is the part that I wanted to get into, because the use case here, people go through lots of tormenting when they're talking about use cases. I can tell you so many experiences with the corporations that will say, so here's a list of my use cases. What do you think? It's like, oh man, that's great. How long did that take? Oh, about 6 or 7 months, right? Because that's what we did. We just talked about use cases over and over, but not necessarily understanding it from the right sort of framework, right? So they started from the backward. They started with the use case, which is supposed to be in the end, but first they were supposed to collect data. So here's a techie speak. If you have a bunch of use cases for 6 months, you haven't collected data from day one. So that means by 6 months later, you have lost 6 months worth of data. So if you start on day one and you haven't started collecting data, that means you have lost 6 months worth of data for the use cases that you've been collecting, and there's no data behind it. And it happens way too often because use cases is something that is very easy to do, but it takes the longest time. If you start collecting data, knowing some of the use cases, in IBM conversation, they call it AI years. So if you're not collecting data between breakfast and lunch, they call it AI years worth of data being lost. So companies that are not collecting data for the next 6 months, they're going to have to collect that data some other ways, which adds to their deployment time even further. So if something was supposed to be deployed in 3 months, now it's going to take 9 months if you calculate it that way, because the data is the core component for anybody who's a non-techie. Non-techies are the data owners, and if they're not understanding data, they're not going to understand the text to code part of it, how they will start coding in the next generation of conversations. So text to code becomes a vital part of the conversation, the data, right? Software is very fuzzy because we don't really understand the total infrastructure of the software. And Sahar can shed some light on that next. But the hardware component is where we're going to jump into. We're not going to talk about data, not at next 7 minutes, right? We're going to have to talk about hardware because hardware is where things gets really clear. If you can pick up something and drop it in your toes and it hurts, that's when things gets real. Everything else is just fuzzy wuzzy, right? Feel good, wormy. Data is one of those things. Software is one of those things. Software doesn't work sometimes. Data is not available all the time. But if you can drop that hardware in your toes and it hurts, it's a physical thing, things are real at this point, right? So Sahar, my question to you is shine some light into the software part of things, right? Because we can talk about data, but data is too wide. But we can narrow down the software a little bit more. Tell us about what's happening in the software part of things.
So hardware is like the backbone that makes all this AI and software possible, right? So from a project management point of view, the focus is on how hardware decisions affect the outcomes and scalability. So like what happened is that like the non-technical people, when they interact with the systems every day, they need to understand like whatever happened with the hardware we deploy, like we have to support the workflows, the data pipelines, the AI models that we have designed. So I'll give you an example. So like from the DevOps and CI/CD pipelines, the infrastructure, if the servers cannot handle like the real time, the data processing, right, the AI outputs, the operational workflows, even if the software is perfect, I mean, what happened is the capacity, the reliability, all the alignment with the business goals does not work. So what happened is that focus is always on performance, scalability, and the decision making, right? So the main question that always come into mind is like, do we have insufficient hardware? Like, can we resolve the bottlenecks, right? Like all these things impact the deadlines, the end users, the ROI. And at the end of the day, that's what the stakeholder, that's what the managers, the management, that's all they care, right? They want to make sure that the ROI is right. The end users are able to adopt. So every day we have to ask ourselves, can the hardware support our what is happening today? Like, can it support it? Does it add any values? Majority of the time the hardware is invisible when it works, right? But nobody cares about it. Everybody talks about AI and AI delivers this. At the end of the day, the hardware is a key ingredient. Your software relies on it.
All right, Mr. Data, give us your shot on the software part of it, because we are going to talk about hardware, but I want to drive that cloud conversation into the hardware. Because the reason the hardware has been absent in everybody's mind is because of this thing called Wi-Fi and these things called hardware in the cloud, right? Let's talk about it a little bit more from your perspective. What have you seen, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I mentioned earlier up in the chat is about enclaves. I think environments, right? So how you were mentioning that as well, and what in our domains, and without giving too much classified, I wouldn't say classified, but without giving too much unnecessary information, right? In the military, we have a lot of, or even the federal government space, disparate networks. Some networks don't talk to each other. It's like bread and butter. Two slices of bread, but there's no butter in between, so there's no bridge or jelly, whatever you want to call it. So so the data that lives here is not the same as the data that lives here. Even though they could mirror each other, they may look similar, but they're not. So now you don't get that bigger piece of the puzzle, and that's always an ongoing challenge, right, within the federal government space. So enclaves, if the model that works well here may not work as well here because it doesn't see the same data. So those are some really pertinent questions, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. It's the same challenges we face. If I tune my CM security my tools here, the same tools, can they transport over here? How do you patch them? Now you're talking about patch management. Some of the second order ripple effects of how between these two slices of bread, what is the communication bridge? Is it butter or jelly or nothing?
Making me hungry at this point.
Yes.
So because of cloud, we are seeing absence of hardware, and this is really something that everybody in the conversation needs to deliver and bring it in to become that hardware advocate. So the easiest way to explain this is that when you have data that lives under your feet rather than somewhere in Ohio because you live in Texas, it's a challenge. And I think you just type it in. It's a challenge to say if your data is not sitting under your feet, you don't have control over it, and hackers have more visibility to it, right? But we're not even going to go there. What we're going to talk about is that data under your feet means AI that is instant and AI that is your AI, right? So the AIs that really cost nothing can balloon in cost over time. So when you're strategizing, you really have to add the hardware component to the conversation and say, let's think about the hybrid model. What if we had cloud, but we also have the hardware that is AI specific for our need within our business environment, right? These data that is being processed, they're processed right next door instead of over in Ohio. And because we don't own the hardware, cost of processing those data in Ohio, and I mean that as a distance, it's not necessarily in Ohio, it could be in Virginia, it could be somewhere in Japan, it could be somewhere in South Africa, who knows? But the distance causes a whole lot of headache because of the ballooning cost. So when we're strategizing, yes, you think about next 6 months for this specific project, but you have to think about next 5 years and how does that hardware impact your 6 months of project, right? So we talked about data ownership. If that data is sitting somewhere else, you only get possibly the feature extraction, which is the very minimal amount of feature extraction that you can do. Feature extraction means getting the most out of data, the 100% value of that data, or maybe 99%. So right now, you can probably think of it from, hey, I'll probably get 50% of the data value for paying all the money anyway. Right? But what if I own the hardware? Now I get more value out of those data, and I still remain the data owner at the end of the 5th year. Data ownership changes completely everybody's perspective into what's the value of data and what part of AI am I going to engage with, right? Stole data is a whole, stale data is a whole, We'll talk about data lakes and data lake houses and all this jazz all day long. But the hardware component, like I said, if you drop it on your toes and it hurts, things becomes real. Things are now physically moving for you. Ability to decide on data is the key. Yeah. So these end user, the non-technical folks that are sitting on the data. I mean, think about it from the perspective of that gentleman that's a park ranger. His data input right now is on a piece of paper on a pen. He's just writing things down. But now, because of we digitized it, we put it on PDF. It still doesn't make much sense because that data is sitting on a PDF. Now you have to extract it. But because you're using a large language model like ChatGPT or something like a chatbot, you can remove some of these data extraction layers. Think about data extraction even down the road. What if you were just speaking into it and the system was developing all these documents for you, right? Why do you even need documents? because you're speaking and you're communicating to another system directly. So the data extraction layers are far removed from what it is today, right? Like your data extraction almost disappears because there's no document blocks in between. It's just me talking to Sahar and telling Sahar, I need this done. Can you do it? And Sahar can just say, well, according to my AI, you're not going to get it, right? Denied, right? No, that's a nice project manager. Come on, you're not that type of project manager. So, I want to get that out because when we're talking about being in the cloud, that's one of the absences that we've had for almost 20 years now, where things are moving into the cloud space, and we all of a sudden gave up our data expertise to the cloud expertise, right? And the cloud expertise can move your AI goals into a certain direction, but you also have to start thinking about what is that one AI that I want in my compound, I want inside of my office, I want it on bottom of my feet, right? I want that AI to be living next to me, air gapped. That's what the butters we're talking about, right? It's air gapped. It has no internet. It works within your installation. It works within your office, right? Your commander has it sitting under his feet. Bosses, right? Or CEOs or C-suite. But I want to stop there. But before I do, I want to hear Grace's thought. Where did I lose you, or did I confuse you anywhere? Because sometimes I talk about hardware, you're like, make that English, please. Are you on mute? You're on mute.
I'm going to get the speaker thing down today before the end of this show.
Because you're going to come back soon.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, Asif has a lot of information, and it's hard to retain, everything that is in his brain sometimes. But so anyway, and we have one of our upcoming tables, we will have a gentleman who sets up data centers. And just to give you a context of this whole, well, not to you guys, but for me, to put it in context necessarily, the massiveness of data and the competition around data and the need to store it, but also the need to have access to it, and and all the ethical things that come with it. Recently, and this may be a little bit off topic, but I just read this article not too long ago in Kenya. Meta and Oracle partnered up to, you heard about it, Mr. Data is shaking his head. They partnered to create Kenya's first data center, one of the massive data centers. So, and what does that mean? And I kind of want to throw that out to you guys, because that falls into having equal access to data, or even competitiveness in, I think we are currently living also on a global level, not just in our immediate proximities. But even, not even just country or city, a state, a company, whatever you want to call it, but it's really global, right? Our data is with the cloud technology and everything else, it's accessible from near and far. So I want to throw it out there to you guys in the sense of from the human perspective, and to kind of help everybody else break it down. What does that mean to people who are in the workforce? How does that relate to managers, supervisors, everyday workers, corporate, and also blue collars?
Yeah. According to our friend Masako, she will say, your data is the most valuable data.
Correct.
Because you're the owner of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we do any research on data, maybe we'll come across the data value. Data is described as the next oil. Data is described as the next electricity. It has lots of these far removed conversation. Like, you don't deal with oils all day long. As the end user, you're not playing with electricity all day long. You just use it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a far removed concept. The thing it's just going to live in the data center. That's where the value of data is. But if we can translate that to say, no, the data that lives in your keyboard, literally as you click in it, it's the valuable part. That's your valuable contribution, right? So when we talk about people, process, and technology, we have this distance between the end user and the technology. So we have to really bridge that gap to say, your daily tasks that you do, if you can minimize those tasks, and as you're doing it, you're producing tons of data. If you can contain those data, and if you can have ownership of that data, the value of the data stays with you. You own it, right? If somebody else sees it, you have to give them permission to see it. If they want to use it, you have to tell them, you got to pay me by penny every time you use it, bro. Right?
Yeah.
Don't look at my data without asking me first, So there's a whole lot of end user conversations that we have to have, and we really have to enable the end users with their hardware understanding. The hardware is where the data is being pushed out, right? So if you want to understand the value of data, you have to understand why the NVIDIA, the hardware company, is worth $5 trillion.
Correct.
Is it because the end user realized it, that their value of data, or is it that somebody else realized the value of their data? Now they're investing into that, right? NVIDIA has a huge hardware infrastructure. So if you're talking about, this data centers, these components, cloud, things are shifting because these hardwares are really changing really, really fast. And next time we get in this mastermind, we will try to introduce the semiconductor chips conversation. That is a very strategy conversation. You cannot operationalize it, most likely, because of the cost barrier, right? It's like, not in the millions. It's not the M's, it's the B's, right? But the reason I say that in a strategy conversation is because we're not operationalizing that yet, but we have to talk about it today. Because if you talk about it, like we said, you look at the 5-year plan, reverse engineer from the 5 years, say, what can we do today that brings the most ROI for the full life cycle? Because a lot of the ROIs that we calculate today says it will work today, 6 days, 6 months from now, and by next year we'll get some money back from it. Wrong ROI conversation. That's a single use case and single ROI. We have to talk about use case ecosystem. We have to do use case assessment, and we have to rank those use cases, right? But when you talk about semiconductor chips and the hardware, all of a sudden your data shrinks, your software shrinks even further, and your hardware is the only thing that's going to make you the money. Best return on investment you can get. But we'll talk about semiconductor chips just to bring that strategy perspective to it. Because to operationalize it, not everybody's going to operationalize it, but they will see the sight of other businesses, how they're shifting and how they have to shift their businesses along with those hardware owners, right? Or the hardware manufacturers or the hardware suppliers, right? So you guys have taken your dinner time to sit down with me. Actually, all of us sit down and talk through, except for this guy who lives in different time zones, so he's no worried about dinner. But I want to give you guys your last thought before we jump off. We'll get off the camera and we can talk offline. But Sahar, we'll start with you. What has been your experience, and tell us more about what would you like to see more in these sort of mastermind roundtable exercise discussions?
Definitely more AI and the risk and the new tools and how they affect data and security. And I would like to see more cloud. Everything is going towards cloud and AI, and how defense and banking domains and how they interact and how do they handle with the government. Security is a big priority in defense world. So AI is still new to government and aerospace world, but it's still getting there. And we as a subject matter expert, I believe there's a lot security to be concerned. Defense and aerospace, they focus a lot on zero trust, and they have a lot of DSA and state compliance that they have to follow. And with AI and without able to understand what security and what risk does it bring with, and yeah, those will be my main topics. And from commercial side, we have a huge amount of real-time examples, that we can take it daily.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and blatantly advertise something for CompTIA, because you mentioned AI and security. So, Security AI Plus, which is a version of Security Plus. So CompTIA has Security Plus certification, Network Plus certification, A Plus certification. SEC AI Plus is the latest certification. Myself and 10 other individuals wrote it in CompTIA's headquarters last year. So we wrote it from the scratch. This is a brand new certification. The emphasis of security AI, so it's called SEC AI Plus. You can look it up because it's been released just this month. So it's time for you to get that certification and tell me how you like it, because I helped writing it. It's when you see a certification that is global and that is coming down from a global authority of certifications, the game has changed on the ground. Nothing is same anymore, right? So any certification that comes out, you can imagine it takes years and years of formulating to get to a point that industry, academia, and media can all accept that as a fact. Security AI Plus, the security of AI, is to that level right now, and we are beyond that because things are moving very rapidly in security side of things. Just to give example that I always use, daily count of security incidents went from 100 million to 700 millions a day within a year, 12 months of date range. That means there's that many more attacks that are happening, and that's how many attacks you have to defend against. And when I say 700 million, I'm not even telling you the full number, because that is only from one single vendor that they're describing that number. So you can go to up to 2.2 billion a day if you're talking about a different vendor. So security is that serious. And shamelessly plugging myself here, but go take that Security AI Plus certification and tell me how you like it. So, Mr. Data, let's talk about, from your departing word here. What would you like to see more?
Yeah, talking about certifications. Do I need another one? No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
No, not you. Not you. You have way too many certifications.
I'm kidding. But I hear the pun.
You have topped out your certification, Max.
So, but I just want to pretty much it may sound cliche, but will resonate exactly what Sega and Sahar were mentioning. And huge thing, especially in the federal government space, right? Data sovereignty, right? And data ownership, the two things that really sum up everything in terms of where these models are fed in. Garbage in, garbage out, as the old adage says, right? Charles Babbage from thousands of years back, or whatever, hundreds of years. It's the same thing holds good today. It's just reworded, rebranded as how these models work and where they get the data from. And not only, like I was talking about geotag data and how dangerous that can be, both for good and bad. Intelligence from geotag data is ridiculous out there. I mean, there's businesses out there that make a living out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you're talking about hardware.
I want that point.
About my favorite topic. You're talking about hardware, devices. People call it devices, but those are hardware, right? So when we talk about hardware, this is not like that easy to understand, because hardware goes deep. We just have to figure out how much of that hardware we use. So Grace, what's your departing thought, and what would you like to see more of in the future?
Mic check, mic check, mic.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I know, I'm kidding. I was just making sure you guys are up. So, I think the time where, specifically from HR perspective, people were tiptoeing around, should we have AI? How do we implement AI? These kind of things are more so about, we need it. We got to be part of the game. We got to be ahead. The problem, well, not necessarily problem, challenges and things to consider are now like, what is the risk, right? From AI and cybersecurity perspective. I think right below, this is my opinion, but right below the legal department of a corporation or organization is HR. You know what I mean? I think we concern ourselves about compliance, regulations, and the risks and ethics and so on quite a bit. And from those aspects, I feel like There is a lot of questions still to be answered for a lot of HR professionals, and I feel like the way I hear it currently, there is a lot of question coming from that perspective, but it's not necessarily tiptoeing anymore. Like a year ago, even was like, oh, are we going to? Should we? There was a lot of hesitation. I think the wall of hesitation has fallen for sure. However, it's now more about how. And I see if you have all the answers to that. I need you to be at the table answering these questions for me, okay?
No, I mean, this goes out as a announcement that, we are going to talk about semiconductor chips next time. That's because I have access to the hardware people. What I need more access to, and I would like to hear other perspective from other people, is that operationalizing part of it, because that's what Grace is talking about. We need to have somebody who's in ML ops industry, somebody who does LLM ops on a daily basis. I have few people, but I'm calling out for as many other individuals that can listen to this message and join me, right? Join this roundtable discussion, kind of like how Mr. Data did. Bring your perspective, share that with the non-techies, and have them understand it from your perspective, because that's how we're going to move forward. We're going to move forward with communications. Semiconductor chips, we're going to talk about communications. ML ops, we're going to talk about communications. All these things are happening. The underlying reason behind this happening is communications, because we're communicating, so things are moving. So with that being said, I'm taking up way too much of your guys' time. I know it's dinner time. I'm going to end the stream here, but we can stick around and talk more. But until the next time, be on lookout for the next mastermind. AYAYAI is out.